Thank you for listening to the BJJ Podcast. We'll be bringing you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and good times. We hope to flatten your Jiu-Jitsu learning curve, help you get the most out of your grappling ability, and meet your goals both on and off the mat.
Welcome back to the BJJ Podcast. Today we have episode 254 with Lieutenant Tyson Kilbey. Going to be an awesome show. I got my buddies Byron and Joe here. How are you two guys doing today?
I'm doing good, Gary. Good to be here with you.
Yeah,
and you, Byron?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Thanks. It's another good day to be recording with you guys and sharing jiu-jitsu with our podcasting community. So we're excited today. Tyson Kilbey. It was a fun interview for me. It was different than the typical interview I'm used to. Tyson wrote a book called Fundamental Handgun Mastery. If you are into shooting, if you are if you have a firearm as a or a handgun in your line of work, it'd be definitely something to look at. But he shares a lot of knowledge in that category. He's also a jiu-jitsu guy, so it's kind of fun to look at the two different comparisons and talk about training and learning one or the other or different similarities. And man, it's just a lot going on. And of course, jiu-jitsu from the law enforcement side is something that he brings that we're always happy to learn about.
Yeah, I train up with a lot of law enforcement people. I train up at the police academy a lot with those guys. And, I always hear them talking about, shooting fundamentals, how to tie in, jiu-jitsu with their jobs. So, I just think it's great that law enforcement professionals are trying to sharpen their mind and body.
You got to stay sharp, and best ways with a sharpening brick, right, Kerry?
Definitely you want to have a sharpening brick. And basically, if you check our show notes, we do have a link to the BjjBrick sharpening brick. It's only $19.99, and it's a great value. We've got a lot of great feedback from it, huh, Byron?
Yeah, I don't really know how that works out, Gary, but we do have a link in the show notes for 6 games for BJJ. The games are designed to play while you roll, help you get better at jiu-jitsu faster, develop your unique game, and really have fun with your teammates and help them develop their games as well and explore jiu-jitsu. The book is an audiobook, so it'll be a lot like you're listening to now. It's a little over an hour long, and there's 6 different games in there that you could play while you're rolling. If that's something that you're interested in, check it out. I'd like to hear how that has affected your game. Playing these type of games have had a big impact on me, and I'm happy to share that with you. So it's $5.99, and there'll be an actual link to it in the BjjBrick website show notes. So check it out if you're interested.
And as Byron said, that's an actual link, not like the fake link that I was just talking about, the sharpening brick.
All right. Well, that brings us to the portion of the show where we talk about an off-the-mat lesson and then drag it on the mat or vice versa. And I was thinking about 8 years ago, I went to work in Brazil. I'm a mariner by trade, run boats in the Gulf of Mexico in the oil field. And my boss told me there were some opportunities overseas. And he said, you can either go to the west coast of Africa or Brazil. And I thought about it for a while, like 3 seconds, and said, I'll go to Brazil. But interestingly, he said, don't worry about the language. It's not a big deal, because I told him I don't speak any Portuguese. And he said, don't worry. You'll get down there. Everybody you need to talk to will speak Portuguese or will speak English. Well, he lied to me. So I get down there, and I get on the boat, and there's 12 guys on the boat. I'm the only American. About half of the crew is Brazilians that don't speak any English, and about half of the crew is various places from Latin America, Chile and Colombia and Peru, and Spanish and Portuguese is very similar. So they pick up on Portuguese pretty quick, and most of them studied a little bit of English in school. So I'm using them as translators. And while I was down there, I worked there for about 2 years. I did pick up enough Portuguese to communicate with my crew. I had to learn real quick how to say port and starboard and fore and aft, and how to say stop, and the things that you need to be able to say to communicate with your crew. How to tell them to tie the lines on the boat when we're tying up, how to let the lines go when we let go. And so I could do that, but I can't carry on a conversation with anybody about sports or the weather. And the reason is because I memorize phrases as opposed to actually learning all the building blocks of the language. You've got to learn how to turn singular words into plural words and how to turn present tense into past tense or future tense. And it's actually very similar to jiu-jitsu. Some people can advance to a degree in jiu-jitsu by just learning moves. But you have to learn the in-between the moves, the transitions and the fundamentals and the building block of it. You can memorize 5 different sweeps, but if you don't understand the fundamentals of the guard that you're playing, you're only going to be able to perform in certain contexts. Does that make any sense, Gary?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense, Professor Thomas. I really like that. And what you're talking about, my wife is a teacher, and I talk to her all the time. She's a science teacher. And, I always had trouble with science. I was never very good at it. But, like you're saying, needing to know the building blocks and everything. And like I kind of tell her now is like, man, if I could go back and learn science today, if somehow somebody could teach physics or geometry and throw in jiu-jitsu concepts or wrestling concepts, I would get it. It's just nobody could ever figure out how to explain it to me. But yeah, you're right. You really do need to know the concepts, the blocks to make it all fit together. But you can be really good, just knowing a few moves and being very good at it. But you're going to stall at a certain level without, having a real big background and know the ins and outs of, grappling.
It sounds like you basically learned how to communicate with the things that were the most important. But I bet that really stalled out, like building relationships with these people, making friendships, and that sort, like being able to carry a conversation is a big deal when it comes to hanging out with somebody and getting to know them personally. So yeah, you're able to refer to the boat or the ship and things that you guys want to do on that are all very, very relevant. But outside of that, it's hard to talk about somebody's family or how they're doing this today, or all those sort of just normal conversation things. You need more of a structure as far as learning the language goes. And same thing with jiu-jitsu. If you could learn a few things here or there and try to piece it together, but if you learn like the fundamentals of why jiu-jitsu works, you'll be able to be a lot more creative. And it goes from doing a move to carrying on a conversation and just able to put things together. Maybe you kind of come up with a combo that most people haven't seen before, that you didn't get shown, but you figured it out.
Yeah, that's a great analogy to the difference between being able to say a few phrases and actually turn it into a conversation. And once you understand how a sentence is built, and you understand the verbs and all the other parts and pieces that go along with it, then as you learn new words, you can fit them into a conversation. It's kind of the same thing with jiu-jitsu. Once you figure out how, say, the closed guard works, then each move you get, you can add it in easier and start to make sentences and then paragraphs and then books like your 6 games for BJJ.
Joe, how long were you down there working?
I worked on like a 90 and 30 rotation, and I did that for 2 years.
I was going to say, I bet as soon as you got back to the States, I bet you were just talking to everybody just so you could have a conversation and talk to people.
Oh, even down there, man, I'd run into an English speaker and it's like, let's visit for a while. Although I'll tell you, one time I was on my way to jiu-jitsu, and I was in a parking garage waiting for the gym to open up, and some guy comes up and starts talking to me in Portuguese, and I said, no fala português. I could say that. I could say I don't speak Portuguese. And he goes, oh, you speak English? And I said, yeah. And I got really excited. And then he said, well, if you have a minute, I'd like to talk to you about Jesus Christ and the Church of the Latter-day Saints. So
then he sold you some Amway.
Something like that.
It depends how desperate you are for conversation. That's all.
Yeah. Yep.
That's funny.
Well, the cool thing is you went down there, you had no fear, you didn't know the language, and, you just took the chance, and, you overcame your fears. And, one thing that Dr. Henry Link says is we generate fears while we sit. We overcome them by action. That's our quote of the week. And what do you guys think about that?
I think that's a great quote for jiu-jitsu and dealing with fears. If you want to compete, and that's something that you're pushing yourself to do, that's great. But when you do that, you'll be a little bit nervous. You might call it fear. There's one thing you could think about that will help calm those fears is think about how hard you've trained coming up to this point. And if you've trained hard, if you've been involved in action, you could rely on the fact that you trained very hard for this, and your actions that happened in the months preceding this match are going to pay off, and that will help alleviate your fears. So if you don't train hard for something that, it could be anything, but a tournament's a good example. Of course, you're going to be super nervous showing up for it because you know you're trying to kind of hope for a weaker opponent. You're trying to game the system. You're trying to find a way to do well in this tournament, but not actually have put the work behind you. And yeah, you should be nervous for that. But if you're confident with your training and you train with good people who push you, and you train hard, that's the action part. It won't necessarily make you fearless, but you could rest assured that you did what you could to get to this point, and the rest is still to be determined. But yeah, as long as you do your best, you got nothing to worry about.
Absolutely. Just start working. I kind of look at it and I think we generate fears while we sit, and I think that's kind of like how your mind can just work when you're idle, and we overcome them when we're active. And I think sometimes about in a match when you get that moment of indecisiveness because you're like, yeah, if I do this bad thing could happen. And if you hesitate in that moment, then your fears can grow and your indecision can get the best of you. And sometimes it's better just to move forward and take that chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely, Joe. It's that our mind can play some serious tricks on us. If our mind can be our worst enemy. And I talk about all the time at jiu-jitsu is when I'm out there on the mat, I just don't think about anything. I'm just all my problems, not just talking about a jiu-jitsu match, but all my problems go away. And it's just like when I have idle time and I'm sitting and my mind starts wandering, that's when I can get myself in trouble. I can start having self-doubt. And like Byron said, put in, let's say I start having some self-doubt about a tournament. If I know I put in that work, I worked hard to get ready for this tournament. I ate well. I got plenty of rest. I worked on my cardio. I worked on my technique. I worked on my stand-up. And I know I dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. I know my my mind's going to be in the right spot because I know I have done everything I could do.
Yeah. This quote we talk. It's not a jiu-jitsu quote. So we took it, we drug it onto the mats, and we made it about jiu-jitsu a little bit. Let's take it, grab that collar and sleeve and just drag it off of the mats. And this could be huge impact because I know out of all the audience, we have people out there who are dealing with some pretty bad things, just numbers wise, because there's things happen to people that are hard. Let's say somebody that you love, or maybe even yourself, is diagnosed with something that's pretty scary. Well, you could sit there and think about it and generate all these fears, or you could think about what am I going to do? What am I doing today? How could I make this a little bit better? What steps can I make to improve the quality of my life, or improve my chances of recovering from this thing? And that gives you something to do. And so those actions not only are a distraction, but also generate like a positive feeling. So you could you can get diagnosed with something. You could sit on the couch and watch Netflix for 2 months and you kind of fade away, or you can say, you know what, I'm going to start to exercise better, eat healthier, and start doing some quality time with family or whatever. Depends on what it is, but you start putting actions into play, and it may not change the outcome, but you'll spend less time living in fear because you're busy doing something that is actually going to help you, if there is a way to do better, to do better. And action is good. Action is also a great way to lead by example. So if same thing, let's say you're a grandparent and you get hit with some bad news and it looks like you won't be around much longer. Well, you could fold up and put it away, and I'm done, and be depressed for the last several months. Or you could realize that, further down the road, what I do now will be an example for my loved ones. So let's carry on and do some action and make the most of what you have left. And it's off the mat completely, but action is a big deal. And even if you're scared, doing something is usually better than nothing. And now we're swimming in the deep waters, boys.
Absolutely, Byron.
I think I'm drowning, but I'm going to take some action, and I'm going to, tread water.
There you go. And like that could be it. You could have been on the ship with Joe, and he took a hard turn, and you end up in the water. And you could look at, you're too far from the shore to swim, but you know what? Tread water for the next 5 minutes, see what happens. Okay, you're not.
You know what? Speaking of the Mariner here, that reminds me of something. When we do our weekly abandoned ship drills, we talk about how to launch the life rafts, how to get from the vessel into the life rafts, and all that stuff. And one thing I always stress to the guys is, you get in the life raft, you got 12 guys in there, and the minute somebody starts saying, "Oh crap, we're all going to die," you've lost the morale battle.
You kick them off overboard.
Well, but one of the things you do to fight that, if you see a guy getting jittery, you see a guy on the verge of having a breakdown, you say, "Hey, inventory the medicine cabinet for us, inventory the supplies," or you say, "The floor to the life raft needs to be pumped up to insulate us from the cold water." You get them doing something, and you got to be proactive with that, because once one guy says, "Oh crap, we're all going to die," then the next guy's like, "Oh, you're right. You know what? Nobody's going to get here in time to help us." So that distraction is a big key.
Joe, have you ever ran into a situation where you guys had to abandon ship?
In my commercial fishing days, I've been in the water once, and I've been in the water almost another time. The Coast Guard's had to save me a time or two.
Yeah. Oh, so crazy.
Yeah. Gary, get this. So the industry, they do monthly training for abandoning ship, but in the ship Joe's on, there's been written that you have to do it weekly.
Yep. And you never know when it's the real deal.
No, but the industry standards, let's just say this is true. I don't know if you're making this up, Byron,
yes.
But let's just say it really was monthly and Joe did it weekly. That goes back to what we were talking about, overcoming your fears. You've done everything possible. Joe is, doing 4 times the amount of training. And when you do go in it, you're probably going to be a little bit more prepared and, overcome those fears.
Well, it's just like they say in sports, and I'm sure, Byron, you know this from your occupation. They say in sports that you practice like you play, or you play like you practice. And that's what we tell the guys on the boat when they're drilling. When an emergency happens, if you've been sloppy and haphazard during the drills, you're going to be sloppy during the actual response to the emergency, and it's going to come back to bite you.
Good point, Joe.
That's probably a good off the mat lesson for jiu-jitsu too.
Yeah, definitely.
You got that right. So, this takes us to our interview with the Fundamental Handgun Mastery. You got to train the way you want to perform. And if you're taking shortcuts in your training, you'll probably have some trouble when it's actually time to perform. And that's a similar thing with jiu-jitsu. If you want to do the armbar loose, in training, you're probably not going to finish your armbar in reality. So, a lot of similarities here. Let's bring us to our interview with Tyson Kilbey. He is the most interesting grappler in the world.
His rear naked choke is so potent that opponents have been known to disrobe upon contact. When he was a kid, he would always compete in the adult division. Now that he is an adult, he is considering making a run at the kids title. He signed up for a sumo wrestling match. The group Salt and Pepper showed up without warning to sing their song, Push It. He not only pushed it, he pushed it real good.
I don't always listen to podcasts, but when I do, I prefer the BJJ Podcast. Stay sweaty, my friends.
All right, my friends, I'm happy to bring Tyson Kilbey to the BjjBrick Podcast. Tyson, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Byron. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks again.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on here. We have a lot to talk about: jiu-jitsu, law enforcement, and jiu-jitsu, and teaching. You're also a firearms instructor, and I think that I always try to find parallels with learning one skill and then learning jiu-jitsu, and anything you can kind of learn from one and bring on to the other, I think is interesting. But Tyson, give us a little bit of an introduction about who you are, where you're at, and what you're up to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm in the Kansas City area in Kansas, and I teach jiu-jitsu. I'm a jiu-jitsu instructor here in Overland Park. I teach the day classes, and I do a lot of private lessons. I'm also, I'm going to start my 19th year of law enforcement next month. I'm a lieutenant for the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. Firearms instructor. I've started my own company 6 years ago, Top Firearms Instruction. And just like you were saying, I mix anybody who knows me, anyone who knows people who know me, know that I mix my two hobbies of jiu-jitsu and firearms together at every level. And I try to find parallels. So, between working in law enforcement and teaching and training and competing and doing all those things, it keeps me busy.
So you've been in law enforcement for a while. What got you started in that?
Man, so I guess it would have been the year 2000. I was working security, not really knowing what I wanted to do. I was working like mall security. This was pre-Paul Blart days. And sometimes I would see some of the cops come in, and, I was doing community college and stuff like that. And I was a martial artist at the time. I wasn't doing jiu-jitsu yet. But anyway, I would get to know them. And then, a couple of them just encouraged me to apply around. And I did it and got on pretty quickly, actually.
And when did you start doing jiu-jitsu or martial arts?
So I started martial arts when I was 5 years old. I was watching a movie on TV. It was actually Enter the Dragon. And and I was just enthralled by it. At 5 years old, you watch a movie over and over and over again. Well, I watched that thing, over and over and over again. And my mom's like, "Do you want me to sign you up?" I'm like, "Yes, I want you to sign me up." So I did that, and I actually did that all the way up past high school for about 19 years. Got a black belt in that style. It was a Japanese striking style called Shito-ryu, and I had a blast. And actually, in that time period is when I was exposed to jiu-jitsu, because our entire school we had a doctor that trained with us, and he had a big screen TV back in, I guess it was 93, right? The first UFC. And we all watched the first UFC and watched Hoist on the big screen. And I was, again, enthralled once again,
Yeah, that's, that is one start to jiu-jitsu that I've heard many, many times.
Right.
You've seen that, and then it's like, I got to do that.
Yep.
That's cool. So up from there till now, what have you, jiu-jitsu wise, what has your journey been like? Yeah,
so it's been about 10 years since I've been training pretty regularly. And I would say even today, I still probably train every day. But my first 5 years, I was one of those guys that would never miss a class, training every day. And it was, I was at the sheriff's office. I worked in patrol, and I worked on our SWAT team. And then when I got to our training unit, defensive tactics, we were trying to find, hey, what's some good defensive tactics for cops? And that kind of re-inspired me to look back at my martial arts training, and that's what really got me back into Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And so it's been 10 years, and I've been working through, and I'm a brown belt now, an instructor. I train with Hoist several times a year, and Henner and Heat On, and I've competed in tournaments and that sort of thing.
What part of jiu-jitsu do you look at and try to teach that to people who are on the street doing police work, but not actually trying to do jiu-jitsu and compete, or just even train several times a week?
Right. I think there's several things. I mean, one thing, and those of us who train jiu-jitsu know this at a very deep level, but jiu-jitsu, one powerful component of jiu-jitsu is it teaches you to remain confident and not freak out in stressful situations. Well, guess what, police officers? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, could there be anything to me better for police officers than an art that teaches you to not freak out, to stay confident, to understand that you might find yourself in bad situations, but it's okay. You can be in those uncharted, unknown territories, and you can come out and thrive. And so that's number one. But there's also another element that I think makes jiu-jitsu so amazing for law enforcement, is that jiu-jitsu, unlike my first art, which was a striking art, you're hitting, you're contacting, it can be very violent. And not that there's not a time for that, but jiu-jitsu can help you control, defeat an opponent without hurting them. And if that's not a win-win for law enforcement, I don't know what is. So those are the two, to me, the main things that make jiu-jitsu so amazing for, I would say, not even just law enforcement, but for all first responders, or for anyone who just wants to defend themselves. Your ability to remain confident in very bad situations, in unknown situations, and your ability to defeat someone else without necessarily causing more damage than you might have intended.
Yeah. As a firefighter, I've been on more than a handful of calls where it comes out it's a medical thing, and you get there and the person is high on something or just having a hard time controlling themselves, and they start hitting people, and wrap them up, take them down, and fortunately, every time I've done that, the families that are there aren't on the side of the other person, or on they're on my side. They realize, okay, this person's out of control. It's largely not even a fight. It's just let's wait until we get some more help and get you calmed down, and nobody gets hurt, not me and not the other person. And I've been pretty fortunate with that so far, but it's largely like if you ask them what just happened, they wouldn't say I just got in a fight. Right. They would say, yeah, I got a little out of control, and this guy was just kind of controlling me after that, which was annoying and it pissed me off. But it'd be hard to say that they just got into a fight because no damage was done, and to me or them, and that's been the way mine have gone so far. But as a firefighter, I'm not exposed to that very often. But as a police officer, you're constantly dealing with people who are upset with you or are fighting somebody else or are mad when you get there and mad at you for showing up and all kinds of things. Can you think of
not only that, you made me think of that too, and I think firefighter, EMS personnel, I think, and obviously you're a very trained person, but I think those guys, you guys need it just as much, sometimes even if not more. Maybe you don't have the frequency of it, but a lot of times when I go on the calls where they're under the influence of a drug or alcohol or something like that, you guys are there helping to control and maybe give medicine or help this person. And the bad thing about those guys is their tolerance for pain is very high. So if you're trying to control them with a strike or something that causes pain, it just doesn't work. And not only do you not want to do that, it's not even effective. So you guys, just to control them, you're trying to save this person's life, and they're fighting you with superhuman strength because they're under the influence of some type of drug. I think that's another, realm that jiu-jitsu it performs so well.
Yeah, I don't want to get into too detailed stories, but I remember I was some guy hit a paramedic, and I had already just kind of like, this is not going to go well. And the paramedic didn't really see that in the person's eyes. And so I ended up behind the person, and he hit her, and I just latched onto him, and we sat down on the couch, and I kind of had his back, and we rolled around a little bit. And I remember thinking, this guy's breaking my grips. Like a black belt level grip, like he's just flying through my grips because he's so amped up and so strong with what he wasn't, huge or anything, but just the amount of force and energy he was delivering. Like, man, I can't let him get control of me because he's going to do a ton of damage real fast. But and usually with firefighters, we're coming in numbers. We're not by ourselves either, but we don't have the tools that police officers have to deal with that. So usually it's just if they're unskilled, they end up just kind of everybody dog piles the person, which is not the best, but it could be worse, I guess. Yep, for sure. Do you remember a time maybe early on in your career or early on in your learning jiu-jitsu when you're like this is really helpful today, that knowing these skills and having the attributes of being calm or knowing how to control somebody, it really paid off big? Yeah, I mean, you're saying, can I relate a time with my can you maybe share a little bit of an example or a story?
I mean, so I got back into jiu-jitsu when I was in the training division, but I didn't just do training. I would go back out and work patrol. And I remember the first time I was on patrol pre-jiu-jitsu, if I would go to a call where there might be a fight or I got that kind of that hair on the back of your neck feeling, I remember thinking, okay, what tool do I have to use? I just remember thinking, just being more kind of amped up. Whereas after jiu-jitsu and training and the confidence I developed, I would go to calls and, the ego wouldn't be there as much. If people would maybe call me names or want to fight, I wouldn't look to prove myself and say, hey, this is I'm the one in authority here. If you want to challenge me, I have tools and backup. I just remember coming out with a whole new mindset almost. And it's like, hey, I know you're upset. I know you're upset with the uniform, but I want to help get through this. And I mean, do I have a specific example? Without getting into detail, I know of a couple where the guy's, suicidal subject, and I talk to him and they realize, hey, this guy's really just trying to help me. And I attribute a lot of that, some of it to maturity and time on the job, but a lot of that to the mindset shift perspective shift that I had with jiu-jitsu. So, and the good thing about that is some of those situations could have gone really south, could have been, much more amped up than they should have been. And because of that, I feel like a lot of successful occlusions, it's hard to quantify. I don't know. I just know that after jiu-jitsu and after training, I felt much more calm, confident. I felt, the ability to look at situations clear. And I haven't, me using force, me having to use control has dropped down substantially from, pre-jiu-jitsu to after jiu-jitsu. And I've never been one of those who's always been in a whole lot of, force cases anyway. But I mean, it's like now that I've been trained in jiu-jitsu, I almost never have to use force. So it's kind of cool.
That's interesting. Do you think that they kind of see it in you that you're confident, or you think that it's on your side where you don't feel the need to start it first? I mean, if you're going to get in a fight and you start after the other person starts, you're behind a lot already.
That's true.
So there's some incentive to saying, okay, this is clearly going to be a fight. I might as well go ahead and tackle this guy and get this thing underway. But being confident, you could say, you know what, maybe it's not going to be a fight. Maybe you can push that back a little bit more. Is that part of it?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think there's a couple things with that. I can speak to, I never know for sure what the other person's perspective is. I definitely know from my perspective that I feel like I'm putting out the I guess the vibe of, look, I don't want to fight you. I don't want to, but I will if I absolutely need to. But I just feel like, when you know jiu-jitsu and you're ready to, you have that confidence to avoid it at all costs. But you're absolutely right about having to flip the switch. If look, we've tried to talk, we've tried everything we can. Sometimes you have to go in and act, because if you hesitate, that could make it worse. I feel like there is an element of that too. But I just feel like you have the ability to see that clearer when you know jiu-jitsu anyway,
Yeah. How did you get into firearms training?
Yeah. So, well, obviously when I started in law enforcement in the year 2000, that was really, we go through the academy and we go through a robust training program. And I'm pretty fortunate at the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. It's a very, they have a very good firearms training program, just very skilled instructors, and they have for decades. So I went through a program there, and I just, right away developed kind of a liking to it, was on our shooting team, was on our SWAT team for a few years. And so I just really liked it and developed it. And then when I went to training division, I started going to the instructor schools, and it just kind of took off from there. And that was really about the same time that I was getting back into jiu-jitsu. So I paralleled really for the last 9-10 years. I've been training. If I'm not on the mat, I'm on the range. It's one or the other. So I've gotten back into it that way. And I would say about 2 to 3 years after getting to our training division, I thought, man, these are a lot of the skills that I'm learning and doing and even teaching to cops. There's a lot of things that civilians, not just police officers, but just your general civilian can take out of this. So that's when it basically started as a concealed carry class. Kansas became a concealed carry state about 11, 12 years ago. And so I started doing that. And it just started as about 8 to 10 people in a concealed carry class. And it grew into my company now, Top Firearms Instruction, that's, 6 years later, I've taught thousands of students across the Midwest, and I continue to teach to this day. So it was just something that I kind of did as a, hey, I'll do this as a side job. And it's really become another passion of mine.
This will be kind of an odd question. Do most students pass the concealed carry class? Yeah.
Well, so here's the thing. The concealed carry class, it's an 8-hour class, and it goes over Kansas law, use of force, basic mechanics of firearms safety, and then there's a qualification, and it's 25 rounds, and there's no time limit. The distances are 3 yards, 7 yards, and 10 yards. And you can use any handgun. So you could use a no recoil 22. You can use any gun you want. And I have that discussion with my students. I say the actual qualification or the difficulty level of the Kansas concealed carry class is very low, but throughout the entire class, I make sure it's reinforced that, if you're going to carry a Glock, a 9mm or something else, you need to qualify and train repeatedly with that gun, because if you don't, then you're more of a danger to yourself or others than you are protecting. And I think that message gets across to my students, because nearly 60% of my students that come through, the concealed carry class, they either send me messages later saying, hey, check this out, I was at the range, or they come back I do additional classes, private lessons, ongoing training. So I feel like most of them get that message and understand that. And I really lay that out in the class, that one class is not enough. Can you imagine doing one jiu-jitsu class and then saying, okay, yep, I did my class, now I'm ready to take on any and all attackers, Yeah. So I try to hammer that home to my students. But yeah, the class itself is not a difficult class, and people come through, they're stressed out. There's a 25 question test. It's very simple, and I go over it very thoroughly, and they do that. So I've had people not pass on their first attempt, and then I continue to help them and get them through. But then we just have that conversation of, look, you need to continue to train, and this is just a starting point, and get as proficient as you can, because how good and how well prepared and how trained are you going to be in that moment that you might need to save your life? And I think most of my students that are willing to give up their time and money to come train with me understand that and do what they need to do. And if they know that they're not willing to, then they just don't carry, a lot of them.
Yeah. I'm interested in comparing the two skills. With jiu-jitsu, it's me against your jiu-jitsu. So like there's a constant arms race. With carrying, it's a little different.
Yes.
And there's not as many, barambolos or spider guards. Like it seems to be fairly like clean cut as far as if I can learn these set of techniques, that's what I need. But if I trained, if I went to train jiu-jitsu every 3 months and brushed up on it, I think it would be that's a bad recipe for my jiu-jitsu. So we go 3-4 times a week. But what's the minimum amount to train with that for most students to be proficient?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. It's like there's parallels between jiu-jitsu and firearms, and then there's obviously things that are unique to each discipline. So what I try to do is pull the parallels. Like, for example, let's say you get to the range once a month. Well, you're not going to train jiu-jitsu once a month, like you said, that won't be as effective. But what I teach a lot of my students is the value of dry fire, where you take your gun, your concealed carry gun, and you do 10 minutes 3 or 4 times a week where you get to a safe area, you make sure you have no live ammunition around, and you practice your draws. Maybe you practice it from your conceal holster. You practice some of your movement. You practice your reloads. And so you give up 10 or 15 minutes, at night, maybe before a workout or what have you, and you do that consistently over time. Well, those 10 draws or those 15 draws, 3 times a week end up into hundreds of draws over a month, end up, into thousands of draws over the year. And then that's where I see the parallels between drilling and practicing techniques in jiu-jitsu and firearms, you see? So there are definitely subtle differences that are unique to each discipline. But what I try to do is know and understand those differences, and then I look at the similarities and I try to apply them together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's just there is the differences are interesting to look at. I remember talking with one police officer, and sometimes your brain will say do this, and then it will say stop doing that, but your body doesn't get the message. And the example that they were giving me was, if you've ever, and I never have, fortunately, but I could see this happening, you leave your keys in the car, and your car's locked, and you're closing the door, and you see the keys laying there, and you go ahead and finish closing the door because your body's already in motion. And I think that, like, I don't know, like but you're holding a gun. So you're holding a gun, and you're trying to decide whether or not to fire or not. And it's just so quick as far as what officers are being put, the situations they're in.
And not only is it's quick, but it's also rapidly evolving in the sense that in one moment, the correct thing to do might be to shoot. And then, like you said, maybe a gun is dropped or someone slips and falls, or maybe someone's running away, whatever it is. And that brief moment in time of extreme stress, the whole situation changes on what's justified or appropriate. So you're absolutely right. And so I think if I'm going to go back to paralleling jiu-jitsu and firearms, it's important in both disciplines, firearms and jiu-jitsu and any hand-to-hand self-defense, is to train to a level that you can do it without thinking about it. Sometimes I've heard it referred to as unconscious competence. And that's the level that you need, to me, in both in both arts or both disciplines. And you're a higher level at me in jiu-jitsu, and I always am in awe of black belts. It's almost like I feel like they're eating a sandwich or sending a text message while they're destroying you on the mat, and it's like, I think that's the level that that's a level you're trying to achieve in both arts, is being able to do it without thinking about it, so that your mind can focus on, the rapidly evolving situation that's happening in front of you.
Yeah, I'm also in awe of black belts. It doesn't change when you get there. So tell me, I always want to get a little bit of advice or a little bit of knowledge when somebody has a job that's interesting. If people ask me about firefighting, I'm more than happy to kind of share that with them, what that's about and how to do that. A police officer, if you're talking to maybe a fellow grappler and they are interested in becoming a police officer, what would you tell them these days?
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, most agencies have ride-along programs, so find one to go on a ride along with, and it doesn't have to be a big city. You can ride along with any agency a few times and just get a general feel with being in the car, going to calls with them and stuff like that. Guys that have military experience, that certainly is something that you can use as an advantage, because a lot of agencies are paramilitary. College and stuff like that. There's all that sort of thing. Physical shape, training jiu-jitsu. I really think that law enforcement, I've said this to others before, law enforcement is still in the infancy of realizing how important jiu-jitsu and how valuable jiu-jitsu could be into law enforcement. So just the fact that you train jiu-jitsu, I think is going to give some credential to you applying to a law enforcement agency. They might look at you. So those are kind of the preliminary steps I would take. Getting to know the agency, researching it, knowing that there's a lot of options. I mean, there are police agencies, city police, county police, state police, federal. I mean, so there's a wide selection of possibilities. There's working in jails, working on patrol, all sorts of divisions. So there's a lot of preliminary research that can be done, and talking to agencies, and a lot of them have recruiting divisions now that would love to let you know about their agency.
Yeah. And Tyson, you're a lieutenant. Tell me a little bit about your career and how you started as a police officer on the street, and then you moved from there to is it a detective or how does that work?
Actually, it was a little. Most city agencies start as a police officer on the street. I started as a deputy sheriff, and what that meant was I actually started as a deputy in the jail. So for my first 5 years in law enforcement, I worked we have 2 different jails in Johnson County. I worked in both of those jails. Then after about 5 years, I got onto our SWAT team and our patrol division, and then worked about 5 years on patrol, SWAT team. I was on our accident investigation unit. And then right about the 9-10 year mark, that's when I went to training, and that was probably 2009. And so in the training division was awesome. I mean, we pretty much did defensive tactics, ground fighting, shooting, firearms instruction. I got to go to instructor schools all over the country. I would have gone for free. I wouldn't tell the sheriff that, but I would have gone for free to do what I was doing. But ultimately, I decided to test for promotion. So I tested for sergeant, went back to patrol for a few years, was a patrol sergeant, continued to train jiu-jitsu pretty much every day, teach firearms, and stuff like that. And then, like I said, that's taken me up to about 1.5 years ago when I promoted once again to lieutenant. And now I'm back to the jail, kind of back to my roots. I hadn't been back to the jail for 12, 15 years or so. And so now I'm back as the shift commander during the evening shift and just going from there. So I do a lot of, being that I work evenings, I do a lot of my training during the day, during the weekend and stuff like that.
Tyson, I'm going to ask you kind of a different question that I've been wanting to ask people. I just haven't found the right person. But I think that you'll be an interesting one to answer this. Take yourself back in time, I guess, whatever age you were when you were applying. And let's say you have jiu-jitsu experience. You've been training for 5 years or so. And you're on the interview panel to get the job. And the question comes up about jiu-jitsu, or for some reason you bring up jiu-jitsu, and describe how training jiu-jitsu will help you do this job. And for you, it was a deputy sheriff in a detention facility or jail. But how? So if that comes up in an interview, everybody is training. But if occasionally some of us get to mention it in an interview, and if we could nail that and really describe and not get maybe too deep into the maths on it and make it confusing, but if you could just describe it to maybe like the interview panel that hired you as, what has jiu-jitsu done for you? Why is that an important part of your life?
Yeah, I haven't thought of that question in this like the way you framed it, but I have an immediate answer, and I got to admit I stole it basically from Henry Gracie.
Okay, cool.
But when I talk to people a lot about jiu-jitsu and talking about jiu-jitsu, it's the same for you. It's just like me. It's just you get excited doing it. And one of the best analogies that I talk about with people and why it's so effective is, you hear a lot of people say, sometimes you just got to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you got to fight fire with fire. And I look at, because of jiu-jitsu, I've learned to fight the fire, which that's the analogy for all the challenges you face on the job, with water. You see, and you being a fire guy, you're like, this is kind of cheesy. But the reality is, I love that when I teach kids, when I teach adult students, and when I think about the challenges I face myself, you can go in and charge and fight fire with fire, but it's so much more effective to fight fire with water. So that's the analogy I use when I talk about what jiu-jitsu can do for people.
That is awesome. And I think that's in an interview, you don't have to explain what an armbar is. You don't have to explain that, all these, who you've met and who you've trained with. Basically, people fight fire with fire, and they, it's taking a challenge head on. And with jiu-jitsu, I'm fighting fire with water. I have different problem solving tools, and for that job particularly physically that you can do. But if you could be at a job, for some sort of business, and they could say, what do you do for hobbies? And you can say jiu-jitsu, and tell me about that. Well, I'm constantly having to solve problems that are presented to me on the mats, and you could think of it like fighting fire with fire, but I try to fight fire with water, and I think that's a neat way to say that to anybody.
Yep, I agree. I love it.
That's cool. So tell me about the book Fundamental Handgun Mastery and how that came to be.
So, and I was just talking to someone about this yesterday, actually, because they asked me, "What, you wrote a book? What was the deal with that?" So I work evening for probably the last year and a half, 2 years as a lieutenant. I've been working the evening shift. Well, I get up pretty early in the morning. I'll get out to the academy, do some private lessons, teach, and then I'll maybe hit a workout, or I'll go do some chores and stuff like that. And I work in the evenings. And in the evenings I'm off, I'm training. But I stay so busy between teaching firearms, doing private lessons, group classes, and stuff like that by the time I would get home, that last hour and a half before bed, I was just so amped up. It was hard to just, after that whole day of training, I would have thought I'd be tired, but no, I was just more amped up. And so I was like, man, what am I going to do, with all this extra energy? So I had the TV on in the background and stuff like that, but I just get on the computer and I would type some of maybe the conversations I've had with students, or maybe some of the lessons learned throughout the day, whether I was at a competition or a range or whatever. And it just started, one chapter became two chapters, started to become more formalized. I started to look at it. I was like, man, this is like 20,000 words I've got together now. And then just more and more. And I was like, I want to write about, this fundamental or a mindset or awareness, because we had a good conversation with a student today about that. And it just came together. And I was like, man, this is something. These are what I'm writing down at night. My thoughts and stuff are things that I'm teaching my students and training. And now I can put this together, formalize it, format it, and put it together and have kind of a resource not only for myself, but for my students. So it took me about a year and a half, 2 years of just writing at night. And then when I decided to put it into a book, it maybe only took 3 weeks to a month to just separate it into chapters and kind of edit it and put it out there.
Safety is a big thing in your book.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about, I guess, firearm safety, and you can't do all that in a part of an interview, but tell us a little bit about firearm safety.
I'm so glad you asked that question. That's one thing, I tell that to my students not every firearms class, whether it's a private lesson or a group class. I say, if you were to leave this class and the only thing you learned was a new or refreshed perspective of firearm safety, then today was a win. I talked to him briefly about statistics, but I just, talked to him about the 4 most important rules of firearm safety. I talk about the tragedies that have happened. I personally know of some, and I recount stories of, people who have lost their kids, lost significant others. And it gets to be a somber moment, but I think it drives home the respect for firearm safety. And then a lot of people do, they do a firearm safety brief. Hey, make sure you're pointing the muzzle in a safe direction, keep your finger off the trigger, and then that's kind of it. They talk about it and they move on. Well, safety for me it's the entire time throughout the training session. And I think students connect with that and respond to that. And, I teach not only to adults firearm safety, but I teach kids classes, firearm safety. I'm talking at 3 or 4 years old. I'm not teaching them to shoot a gun, but I'm teaching them safety rules to the extent of what if they ever see a gun? What is a safe order of operations? So firearm safety, the first 2 chapters of my book are entirely devoted to firearm safety. And that, to me, that's the most important thing. Everything after that is the icing on the cake.
So that's an interesting idea about, somebody has fairly young kids, and we're not wanting to show them how to shoot the guns or how to deal with them, but I can see one strategy is just to hide them or lock them up and keep them away, or tell them. What's a good strategy for dealing with that?
I'm so glad you asked that, Bart. And I've had this conversation with countless parents, and I'm telling you, they connect with this analogy. Whether it's a group class or I'm talking one-on-one, because that is such a common parent question to me is, hey, what age should I teach them? I know they're not ready to shoot, but what should I teach them? What age? Is it better just to hide guns from them? So here's what I do. I say, listen, imagine, and I have a son, Tyson Jr. I said, imagine I tell my 8-year-old son, we're in a room and we have there's a table in the middle of the room, and I put a Mountain Dew can in the middle of the room, and I say, Tyson, don't ever drink from this magical drink of mystery. You got it? And then I leave. What is the very next thing he's going to do? By human nature, we're just so curious, and kids especially take that times 100. They're more curious than adults. I mean, kids are just so curious about the world. Well, as soon as I leave, he's going to chug that thing. If he's like most kids, I know I would have. But if I change that and I say, look, Tyson, this is a Mountain Dew. It's a pop or a soda. It's sweet. It tastes pretty good, but it's not the most healthy thing in the world. But I'll tell you what, I want you to try it. If you eat a healthy dinner, or if you do your chores, or we work together on your homework, you have a half a can with dinner, and we'll go from there. He's much more likely, I'm talking exponentially more likely to not go behind my back, to respect that I'm allowing him to try it. And, there's always exceptions, but for the most part, that is a great way of teaching and helping someone learn and satisfy their curiosity. And it's not an exact analogy, but it's very similar to handguns. If my whole thing is, just hide guns, I don't want them to be anywhere near guns, at some point in their life, they're probably going to be exposed to someone else using guns or seeing a gun themselves. And if the only strategy was, I don't know anything about them, what do I do? They're so much less prepared than if they understand what a gun is, how to respect it, and what the order of operation is if you ever see it. And once I explain that to parents, the vast majority of them are like, that makes sense. I mean, there's 300 plus million guns in America. To hide them from guns is virtually impossible. So who do you want to teach them about guns? A qualified professional or, their buddy when they're a teenager? So I think it's important to do it early, and I think it's important to let them know and understand it and satisfy that curiosity. So that's one thing that I've been so lucky to the previous sheriff that I worked for was really big on teaching firearm safety to kids. He saw me do a class, and we started doing that for the sheriff's office, and that program expanded quite a bit, and I'm pretty proud of that one. So,
yeah, that's awesome, and it's definitely something that if you have kids that are going to be around guns, and depending on, this is Kansas, you and I both like, that's the way it is. I mean, some houses don't, but a lot of houses have firearms in them, and if you don't, their friends might, and just have some knowledge. And I think for especially young boys, it's hard to. They want to be cool, It's hard for them to be around something like that. And also, if they don't know how to be safe, to tell their friend to stop doing this, or this, not like to have that little bit of authority or experience, like, okay, we're not doing that.
Yes.
Because they still want to be cool because they were dumb kids,
What's funny is my son, he's a very high energy. He does jiu-jitsu with me. He actually does shooting competitions with me, and he's a wrestler, and he's just so high energy, and he's just a knucklehead, which a lot of kids are. But one of my proudest moments as a dad was when he's playing toy guns with one of his buddies in the neighborhood, and I looked over at him, and he's like, "Hey, get your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire." I was so proud of him. He was the expert right there in that moment. Like I said, my kid, he's a great kid, high energy, but he can be a knucklehead. But when when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
And he could, with that level of authority, like, could be a kid telling that to a 30 or 40-year-old adult. Like, okay, you're right. I had my finger on the trigger. You're like, that's a pretty big no. But anybody calls you out on that, it's not safe.
I'd like to share one of my secrets with you. When I teach a kid's firearms class, I always, and I mean always, basically demand that the parents stay right there and watch the class. And there's two reasons. One, I don't want any controversy of what exactly was taught later. I want them to be there the whole time. But two, I'm not just teaching the kid.
Yeah.
That safety class is for the adult just as much. Because let's be real. If a 3 or 4 year old gets access to a gun, it wasn't their fault. It was the parents' fault. So when I teach these kids classes, it's kind of like a parent instructional class in disguise. It kind of saves them the ego. It's like, oh yeah, this is for my kids. But the reality is I'm teaching the parent just as much.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So as long as we don't share that with anyone except all the people that listen to this podcast.
No, it's different than a lot of times. Jiu-jitsu, you come in, you drop your kids off for the hour, and It's kind of like you go run your errands or whatever it is that you're doing. But no, I want you here to watch, and it's funny to watch some parents try that with jiu-jitsu. It doesn't work. They'll come in, their kids will do jiu-jitsu for 2 months, and the parents are watching and learning these moves, and then they're ready for the adult class. You didn't learn anything. You just watched a bunch of kids' classes. It doesn't really work like that.
Do you think, though, I feel like some parents really want to do jiu-jitsu, but they almost use their kid as kind of like the little trial to kind of see what's up. It's like, yeah, this is for them, but really deep inside, they really want to get in the mat. And I agree with you 100%. They just need to get out there and enjoy the experience. But I feel like there's a select group of parents that they put their kids in just to kind of see it, but really they want to do it themselves too.
They're fighting those nerves. And I used to. I haven't done it for a while, but when I was around them more, I would say, come on, you got to feel this, as and occasionally drag a parent onto the mat and get them to just feel, hold me in side control, or try this takedown on me, or whatever, and just that, like a little bit of dipping your foot in the pool and seeing if you like it, and versus just watching it, because it's hard to just watch it for an hour and not get some interest in it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So you also talked about training with the Gracies, or Hoist Gracie. What's that like?
Oh man, it's awesome. I mean, just in a word, it's awesome. I've learned so much, not just of jiu-jitsu, kind of learning it from the source and stuff like that, but just the teaching methodology and just the genuinely good people that they are. They really, I'm a teacher. I like teaching, and I feel like teachers that really genuinely want their students to succeed are the best. And I get that feeling from, Henner, Hedon, and Hoist when I train with them. And I can't say enough good things about it. I get to train with Hoist probably 3 or 4 times a year, and Henner and Hedon maybe 1 or 2 times a year. And I always love it. It's always a good time. I learned, not just jiu-jitsu, but just teaching and just how to be a good person. I mean, they're just genuinely good people.
Could you think of a way that they taught something, or maybe a particular style that has affected the way you teach, either jiu-jitsu or firearms?
So Henner, who I think is one of the best teachers in the world, with him, it's the enthusiasm. When you see someone so enthusiastic and so hyped about something, you can't help but to give it some attention, right? To be like, man, if this guy is this hyped up about it, there's got to be, let me at least see what it's about. So Henner's enthusiasm connects well with me. So that's one. With Hoist, it's so funny with him. You're in the room with a world-renowned, UFC legend, and he's joking around with you. I don't sense any arrogance with him. He's over in the corner on the break talking to the janitor, or giving crap to somebody over here, or just joking around. And he makes you feel like you're just, one of the guys that you're just hanging out with. So just to see that interaction is really cool. One thing, that Hoist did recently in a seminar, he was doing a seminar for some guys they were mainly Kempo guys. And so they weren't really grapplers. So he's teaching them some basic jiu-jitsu, and they were going hard. I mean, these guys were extending arm bars, and these were some big, strong guys. And I'm like, man, I was getting a little nervous. And so Hoist goes, time out, guys. And he starts kind of doing an analogy. He's like, imagine I'm doing this, and I'm ripping this arm, and then I do this. What is my partner thinking? He's thinking, okay, I'm about to rip your arm, and then he's doing this. And so he didn't call anybody in particular out, but he just kind of did like a comical yet serious demonstration of what could go wrong in a kind of a laid-back way. and the whole tone of the class changed. So I got to watch somebody not only masterful at jiu-jitsu, but somebody control a classroom and help avoid injury and help control a pace. And I was like, man, that's cool. I'm going to steal that, and that's just one analogy. But just watching those guys control a class, no two classes are exactly the same. And to watch those interactions to me have been so valuable. And, to some extent, I try to take those lessons to any class that I teach and recycle them.
Yeah, that's an interesting skill. And for a coach or an instructor to be able to control a class and to alter the culture of that class, that's very important.
Yep. Yeah, because I've seen newer instructors, who are very knowledgeable and very talented, but the whole class is different because, sometimes no two attitude of a class is the same, and one class went great, but the very next week the class didn't go near as well, and it's no fault of the instructor. They taught the same way, but they didn't control the class in the same way,
Yeah, and that's, it may not be the fault of the instructor, but it might be what was presented to the instructor, and they didn't deal with it the way that somebody else could have, I guess.
Exactly.
That's why teaching kids for me is tough, because they always present different things at you.
Oh, my.
Like, man, I'd rather teach adults.
Well, questions you don't expect, comments that adults maybe wouldn't make in reserve, and you got to go right in and just roll with it. And, that's another thing I'll give, Henner and Hedon credit for, is just learning how to interact with kids and almost becoming a kid again yourself out on the mat has been a kind of a fun deal with jiu-jitsu and learning that. I actually enjoy the kids classes, but I know exactly what you mean. I've gotten questions in kid classes and stuff like that where I was like, wow, didn't expect that. Not sure how I'm going to handle this. So.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're a guy who's always training, always wanting to get better. What training events are you looking forward to?
What training events?
Yeah.
Well, I always look. I'm a certified instructor for the Gracie University, so I always go there to Torrance in January. So I always look forward to January, which for me is about the only good thing in winter. In August, I'm going to Tulsa to train for a week with Hoyce. He's doing his law enforcement 5-day law enforcement instructor class. So I'll do that, and man, that's coming up in like 8 weeks. So I'm looking forward to those two. I haven't competed in a tournament in a couple years, and I'm thinking about getting back doing some submission onlys. With the teaching and stuff, that's been on the back burner, but I'm thinking about doing that. So those are from the jiu-jitsu side. I'm looking forward to that. And then from the firearms side, I've been competing in a lot of steel challenges, and I have some conceal carry class and assistant instructor classes coming up. So I've pretty much got something either every weekend or every other weekend, all the way up till for the next 6 months. Yeah. So shooting or jiu-jitsu.
Tyson, what's a steel challenge?
Steel challenge is a type of shooting competition that's basically 5 steel targets. There's 8 stages, and you run it for time, and your best 4 times out of the 5 runs count, and you score it, and then it's pretty much ranked. Every time you go, it goes into the computer and it ranks where you're at nationally as far as how well you shoot against other shooters and skill levels and skill sets. And you have regional competitions all the way up to national championships. So yeah, it's definitely, you could just look up Steel Challenge and you'll see the Steel Challenge Association, and it's a very fun shooting competition. And what's cool about it is you can shoot a 22. My son shoots it with me. He's 11 years old, and he shoots a 22 rifle, and you can shoot 9mm open guns and all sorts of things. So it's definitely a cool competition for basically any skill level.
Cool. That's interesting. Yep. I've never heard of that, and shows how much I know about the shooting sports.
I say Steel Challenge. If you're not into the shooting sports, it wouldn't be something that would be widely known. But yeah, if you're, and like I said, it's any skill level. So if you're just mildly interested, it's definitely something to look up. I'll just warn you, it's kind of addicting. It's like jiu-jitsu too. So
it's like jiu-jitsu, but it could be, instead of buying a gi for $150, you're buying a firearm for well over that.
Oh, exactly. And then you're constantly buying ammo. So I would suggest maybe stick with jiu-jitsu.
That's funny. Real quick, you talked about competing. Has going out there and competing changed the way you view yourself, or the way you think about people that you're having to deal with at work? Has getting in those kind of safer fights helped you?
Yeah, I think so. My first tournament was as I guess it was still a white belt, but it was one of those tournaments where I looked it up. It was just a local tournament, and I'm waiting. I got to, I think registration was at 8:30. I got there at 6 a.m. There was nobody around, and I waited, and my first match wasn't until 3 p.m. that day, and I was nervous. I mean, I had all the highs and lows. I went through every range of emotion all day, and then I went out, and amazingly, I won my first match, I think, by a guard pass. And I was just addicted, but I mean, it was all day long, and I was I don't think I'd been that nervous in any law enforcement activity beforehand. And then I ended up, losing my next couple matches. But after that, I went home that night, and I just had that kind of like reverse adrenaline dump, and I thought, man, this is so cool. And I mean, it was something like I didn't know if I was going to have the courage to do it, and I knew I was excited about doing it, but I was nervous. There were several times that day I thought about, oh, I'm going to go home. I don't need to do this. I'm not going to wait. I was trying to make every excuse, but it was an accomplishment that I was like, oh, this is cool. So I definitely think in terms of that and applying that to law enforcement and being courageous and having to deal with situations you might not want to deal with, it's certainly helped with that. So yeah, for sure.
That's cool. How could somebody connect with you or train with you?
Great. Oh, thank you. You can find me on Facebook, Tyson Kilbey. My Top Firearms Instruction is my Facebook page that has a lot of my training events. I also have a website, Top Firearms Instruction, Twitter, Instagram, you name it. So you can pretty much any social media, and I love connecting with people and just talking about training and that sort of thing. I saw the camp that you guys did this weekend. I got jealous. Some of my social media friends were posting it, so I'm really hoping if you guys do that next year to be down there. I mean, that's going to be on my to-do list that I need to schedule out. Cool. In fact, if I wasn't teaching, I'd found out about it a few weeks before, but I had a couple classes scheduled. Otherwise, I would have made it down since I'm not too far. Yeah, we look forward to meeting you. Hopefully, it's a good chance we'll do it again next year. It's a bit of a ways out there, but I don't know why not. So yeah, it was fun, and I think everybody learned a lot and had a good time. Awesome. But I'll put some links. Where's your book? How could somebody find your book? Oh, thank you. Yeah, I probably should announce that since I try to get the word out about it. Well, it's on Amazon, and it's paperback, and it's also on ebook for those that like the Kindle ebooks better. It's available there, and then I always have anywhere from 20 to 500 copies on me or in my car everywhere I go on any of my training events. So it is out there for people, and I really. It's so exciting for me to get to look at reviews or to get messages from someone to say, hey, I read your book, I like this, or hey, that was a cool concept. So it's been neat. It's only been out for 3 months, but it's been I attribute me being able to write this book back to jiu-jitsu. I don't think pre-jiu-jitsu I would have had the confidence to tackle such a task. That's something I've always wanted to do is write a book, and I think jiu-jitsu's helped me realize that, it's going to be a lot of work, but it's manageable. So cool. And I'll put links to that. Find the book. Who is the book targeted at? Is it just people who are interested in firearms, or is it officers on the street? So that's a great question. And my intention, and from the initial feedback that I'm getting, is I think I've accomplished it. My intention is this book has a little bit of something for everyone. And that can be very difficult. A lot of people are really skeptical. Well, how's that possible? Well, Fundamental Handgun Mastery, I talk about safety in the first 2 chapters, and I talk about the fundamentals, but then there's portions of it that can be related to any skill. Like the training chapter, the concepts I use for training can be related to any skill. The awareness concepts can be related to someone who doesn't carry a firearm at all. And so the reason I think that I've kind of accomplished this goal of making it kind of more of a broad appeal is I've gotten, let's put it this way, I've got a text from a Grandmaster level Steel Challenge shooter. And Grandmaster level is somebody who's basically your highest of highest, pro level shooter. And he sent me a text saying, hey, I read your book. I really liked it. I pick up a few concepts. Great job. And I was like, man, this is cool. I looked at that text like 4 times just to make sure I was reading it right. But then I got a call, or was it I talked to a lady at a class, and she's like, hey, I read your book, and she was a complete novice. And she's like, man, I I really liked it, and I felt like I followed most of it, and I picked up stuff that I can use just from a self-defense aspect, not even related to firearms. And she's like, I thought it connected well. So with those 2 comments, I thought, man, that's great. I got feedback from a grandmaster level shooter, and I got feedback from a complete novice. Both of them took something a little different, but genuinely told me that they picked something up from it. And I was like, yep, that was what I'm targeting. And did I do that? I don't know yet. It's only been out for a couple months, 3 months in about a week. So I'll see if I'd like to see if that trend continues. If it does, then I'm very happy.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the type of book that you could read it, and especially if you're not at that extreme mastery level. But a year again, read it again, and you'll learn stuff that you just didn't even realize was in the book the first time around.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
With Fundamental Handgun Mastery, are you trying to break things down and keep them pretty simple, and also kind of bridge the gap between that and the super advanced? But how much of that is important to keep things pretty simple?
Oh, that's everything. I mean, that is my mindset on teaching. And I wanted to tell you, I saw that YouTube video, the BjjBrick YouTube video, and I think it's only been out for a few weeks, but I watched that, the one you did about too much technique can actually be a disadvantage. And man, I probably watched that thing 2 or 3 times because I connected with that video on such a very high and real level, because you were talking about, you want to correct and do this and give this information, and by the time you're done, the student is frustrated because you've just overloaded them with information and they're not getting better and this and that, and that is exactly what I try to do is when it comes to any type of mastery, but with Fundamental Handgun Mastery is I try to keep things simple, build on those skills, and then in time, in repetition and focused training, you get better and better. So that is the teaching and training methodology. And like I said, that video, I wanted to give you props for sure on that video. I want to show that to some of the guys I teach with and some of the newer instructors, because I thought you nailed that one spot on.
Well, thanks. And it's been a while since I recorded the video, but if I had to do everything to the perfect level to where I had the same ability or same trigger as same as somebody who has been doing this for years and is a master level shooter, I'd never get to pull the trigger and I'd never get to practice. But you have to bring me up to where I'm safe, you have to bring me up to where I'm going to hit the target it's somewhere on the paper, and then work from that framework, because I'm a beginner versus somebody who's very skilled. You're going to work at different details and help them do things differently, and you have to teach to where the student is.
Very, very well said, Byron. I couldn't agree more.
Well, Tyson, it's been a blast talking with you. Thanks so much for hopping on here with me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I love the podcast, and thank you very much.
I want to thank Tyson Kilbey for hopping on here with me. If you're interested in his book, there'll be a link to it in the show notes, or you can just go to Amazon and type in Fundamental Handgun Mastery. It pops right up. It's not an affiliate link, so it doesn't really matter to us. Just happy to have him on here talking about jiu-jitsu and talking about the handgun mastery, which I really don't know much about. I guess I know enough about to conversate about it. Kind of like Joe was talking about, like basic ideas, but when he started talking about competing and stuff, it was all pretty new to me, and it's just kind of neat to learn about a new sport that I've never really looked into. Thank you, Tyson, for stopping by and telling us about jiu-jitsu with law enforcement, and I always appreciate somebody talking about another sport or physical aspect and bridging that back to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and you're talking about that, Byron. Another sport and bridge into jiu-jitsu. Like, this morning I was training, and Byron was on the other side of the mat working with his wife, who is in law enforcement. And, I saw you guys working, if she gets knocked down, real life stuff. And that was just cool watching you two work that and drill that. And if that situation ever comes up, and, it goes back to all what we've been talking about, being prepared, training, like Lieutenant Kilbey was talking about, same thing.
I just want to give you guys a quick reminder that this podcast grows digitally and analog style, and the easiest way to have it grow analog is to tell your buddies about this. And most people do that with sharing like the link on online or sending an email to somebody. But really, if you're training and you thought this was an interesting topic, maybe you have a training partner that is really into pistols and handguns, or a law enforcement training partner. Send them to check out the BjjBrick Podcast, episode 254. You're going to love it. a couple of weird guys on here talking, but once they get down to the interview, it gets good.
Hey, Byron. When you said a couple weird guys, you and Joe aren't weird.
Well,
I think you guys
Gary.
are normal. Yeah.
One weird guy. We'll let you decide.
One weirdo and his two good buddies.
Just telling your friends has been a very effective way that we've grown, and I know that a lot of our big fans have at least told their entire gyms about us, and that really means a lot to us that you guys are sharing it. And it podcasts aren't for everybody. This podcast isn't for everybody, but it's something you enjoy. Good chance your friends might like it too, because they could already put up with you.
Because in your group of friends, there's always one weirdo.
And if you don't know who that is,
it is probably you.
Yep.
Let's take a look at the website, cavemantraining.com. It may sound like it's kind of weird, but man, they got some cool stuff on there. And Caveman Training has an article called 3 of the Best BJJ Conditioning Exercises. And not a big secret, it involves a kettlebell. And this seems like the go-to thing to do for jiu-jitsu. And I've done some kettlebell work. I know Gary has. I don't know, Joe, have you done much with kettlebells?
I have not. I understand it's wildly popular.
Yeah, the cool thing is you don't need an entire gym full of stuff, and you could do these workouts at home. And they're, to me, with my ability, they're pretty quick because you get going, and then it's like, man, I'm good. I'm tired now.
So you guys have both done it. I'm reading the article here, and it lists 6 things I think that are benefits of kettlebell training. Tell me if you guys have found these to be true. It's cardiovascular endurance,
Check.
muscular endurance, mental toughness,
Sure, why not?
explosiveness, power, and mobility. You find all those things.
I don't know if I'm getting mental toughness from my kettlebell training, but all the other ones for sure. I think jiu-jitsu is such a mentally challenging thing that it might add a little bit of mental toughness, but compared to getting beat up every day on the mats, it doesn't.
Now,
but I think it's how you're working out too, Byron. We have a good friend, Kim Fox, who, if anybody's into kettlebells, you're definitely going to know who she is. She's a world champion, and she one of the competitions she does is a long cycle, which is like 10 minutes. And I'm not very good with kettlebells, so I think it's like a 10-minute clean and jerk. How many repetitions you can do. And, if we're not, I guarantee you, Byron, if we were trying to do 10 minutes of clean and jerks or basically anything, I mean, we could do swings, 2-handed swings, 1-handed swings. I guarantee you there would be some mental toughness to get through that.
Yeah, when you're competitor, that's what I was thinking. If you've done one long cycle where you got 85 reps and then you're trying to get 90 and you're trying to do 95, I can definitely see where that would help you develop some mental toughness.
Yeah, it's like you just want to quit. I mean, I can tell you, I'd be in that situation. Oh, it's easy to just throw the kettlebell down and, they say it's good, but, I've still got 2 minutes on the clock left. I've got to figure out some way in my mind. I've got to go to some crazy spot and just to keep myself going, some David Goggins stuff, just to figure out and keep me going for those next 2 minutes.
Yeah, what I like about the kettlebell thing is, I was talking about before, you don't have to have a bunch of equipment. I mean, it's like if you want to lift weights at the house, have fun. You're going to have an entire room dedicated to weightlifting. You're going to have a bench. You're going to have some bars. You're going to have a decent collection of different weights you could add on and some free weights. Kettlebell, you can get away with having literally one kettlebell. I mean, sure, a couple different weights would be good, but you could do a lot with a single kettlebell and get some great workouts. So I think this is one thing that is often neglected in jiu-jitsu, and I know I wouldn't have a huge motivation to become more physically fit, except for, jiu-jitsu gets easier when you're more fit. And that's just true. Yeah, technique is great, but if you could add, a certain percentage of power, or if you could be using, instead of using half of your power, be using a quarter of your power to do the move, man, it gets easy. You can do jiu-jitsu all day long. And instead, if you don't do that sort of training, you're having to use a larger percent of your energy to get the same job done. So don't think of it as like you'll start lifting weights and you'll be like the person who muscles things. You'll just get things done with a less percentage of your own energy is one way to look at that.
But isn't that another lesson that kettlebells help you learn, is that efficiency and correct technique is part of the equation? I mean, because I don't do kettlebells. I imagine it's going to be twice as much work for me to do some of the stuff that you're doing, Byron.
Yeah, and I'm not obviously the most knowledgeable kettlebell lifter, swinger person guy. That's scary, but but it doesn't take you long to figure out the basic techniques behind some things, and it doesn't take long either to have like pretty significant increase. So if you write down today I did this, and how many reps you did, and like scale 1 to 10 how hard it was, and then do that every few days, every couple times a week, you'll write down that we're doing more and struggling less for the same workout, or you'll just add more to the workout to make it a good workout, and you'll be surprised with how plastic, how changeable your body is when you treat it well and put it through a good exercise. And that's the same thing with jiu-jitsu, but kettlebells are, the technique isn't quite as complex because nobody is there messing you up as you're trying to do it. It's really you versus yourself, or you and the weight working that you're trying to move.
Well, one thing that really helped me is, years ago before kettlebells were getting popular is when I first was introduced to them. And I got lucky. There was a guy who was, from what I heard, he was like, one of the first kettlebell people in Kansas. And what he was doing was he wanted his kids to train jiu-jitsu. So me and my buddy would kind of learn from him. He would just, show us every exercise, and we'd spend, an hour on one exercise. He'd show me exactly my feet should be. He would just sit there and critique my form. And the one thing that, he really told me is like, we don't need a lot of weight. And, and Byron, Bruce, and Bruce was the guy that would train with me with this guy. And, he'd be like, oh, this weight's too little, and this guy's a big 300-pound power lifter. And he would say, no, just pick up the, the smaller kettlebell and just have him doing it for time. And, it'd wear us out. But I just thought it was so great that I had that one-on-one instruction with form. I don't want to mess my back up, and I would have tried to go too heavy. And, I think it's something you definitely want to, make sure you're doing it properly. If you got an instructor or somebody in town who can, critique you and show you, how to do it properly, I think it's just going to make it, make your gains that much better for you.
Yep. I'll go back to something I said last week. I think part of what will determine how much you benefit from something like this is how much you enjoy it. If you enjoy it, you're really going to get into it and get a lot of benefits from it. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not sure if you would enjoy it, give it a try. If you don't know much about it, make sure and go to Caveman Training. There'll be a link in the show notes. In the article, they have several videos attached as well, so you can get an idea what some of the moves are, how to do them correctly, and you can pick up a kettlebell for like $20 at Walmart or something. So like you were saying, Byron, for very little space and very little financial investment, you could get into this at your home.
Yeah, my kettlebell, when I do it, I pull it out from behind the TV. There's space there, and I do some swings and some lifts, circus get-ups, and put it right back behind the TV. I said, nobody's way.
Yeah.
So you think if I put my grandson in a pair of overalls and just grab the back strap there, you think I could make that work?
That's real caveman training right there.
There you go. But he lists the three main exercises that you'd be looking at for endurance, but really, or for conditioning exercises. But like Gary was talking about, we had a big guy who struggled. He didn't struggle. Like Gary was talking about, he had a big person and he wanted to do heavier weights. But jiu-jitsu isn't about moving like super heavy weight one time or three times. It's about not having your muscles fail you after 10 minutes or after the third roll or after a bunch of fatigue sets in. It's about building, like, you want the power, but you also need to be able to do that a reasonable amount of power for a reasonable amount of time. And when you roll with Gary, an unreasonable amount of time. But that's what Gary, like last week, Gary was talking about how he enjoys kind of rolling a long time with somebody and pushing them, and then they kind of get tired, and then it gets real easy. And, I think maybe because some of Gary's kettlebell training, he's able to push that a little bit, even though he's pushing the age category too.
I don't know if that's a compliment.
I don't know.
Yeah, you haven't figured that one out there.
But is that the way you are? Kind of some of you think about that, Gary? Like, you're rolling with me, and you can tell when I'm getting tired. Like, man, it gets easier when he gets tired.
Yeah, but I normally think I'm the guy who gasses out first because of my age. But I think I've learned how to conserve my.
Well, you're gassy because of your age.
Yeah, true. That is definitely true. But I do think that, working with kettlebells and any kind of, weightlifting, is definitely, in cardiovascular activity is going to help me. I do think, the best way to get in shape for jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu, but my body can't take doing jiu-jitsu all the time. And I think kettlebells is a great supplement. It really, strengthens my core, which is something that's really, really important. We're working, these exercises for a long time, which, like you said, is building that muscular endurance that's going to help me on the mat. And the one thing about kettlebells is it builds all these muscles that I don't hitting regular weights. Like, man, just doing regular swings, my hamstrings are on fire. And, I'm like, come on, from a swing, it doesn't seem like it. My hamstrings should get tired. But they do, and they feel it the next day. But, grip work, we're holding on to that thing for a long time. And, grip work is very important, in our game. So definitely check out the article. We have a link to it in the show notes. And as Byron and Joe said, definitely try kettlebells. Let's see what's, can't hurt to try it and see if it works for you. That brings me to... like Byron, said he's tried kettlebells, he's tried different things, but it kind of brings me, we have a portion of the show where we have a fake audio book.
That's
and
true.
Most of the time it's Joe and I put on the spot, but, Byron's been working on this one for a while. Kettlebells made me think about it, but, Byron, also talks about his caveman training. But Byron's, it's called Caveman. Byron's audio book is called Caveman Training. My experience with Kegel balls. And, Byron doesn't, he tried to use kettlebells, but he got the name wrong, and he went into a store and asked for Kegel balls. And this audio book is going to tell you all about it. So, Byron, can you tell us a little bit about your audio book?
Of course I can tell you about this audio book. I don't know how I'm going to relate to jiu-jitsu, but the biggest thing is when you're ordering in something like that online, make sure you're on the right website when you order your kettlebells.
Kegel balls.
Yeah. Well, so I found the whole thing by mistake, but there's a large online community that really works with the Kegel balls, and not a lot of dudes in there, but I'm one of the better guys at it, and so I'm able to do really well in the men's division. And you need somebody to help coach and train you, and nobody better than Joe has been. He's been there for me, right by my side.
That's because I do my research. And let me tell you what you will find if you go to WebMD. Kegels are exercises that help you zero in on and strengthen muscles below the bladder that help control urination. Oh. In men, urinary incontinence can be caused by a weak urinary sphincter that may result from surgery or prostate problems, an overactive bladder, or a bladder that doesn't contract. So if you're having a problem with premature leakage, Kegels are your friend.
Yeah, and the one thing, like I know you've talked about this before, Byron, but your guard, and triangle, anything you need to use to squeeze has gotten a lot better. And you said that had a lot to do with the Kegel balls.
Yeah, I just felt like, with the being able to control the bladder a little bit better, I was less leaky. I didn't want to get like Gary and put somebody in a triangle and then suffer some leakage. I feel terrible about that. Gary doesn't seem to, he just does that and people get upset, but that's what Gary is. But I really want to have full control. It's hard to stay. So I guess the root of this book is to work on these exercises, and you'll be able to be fully hydrated, train with a full bladder, and remain very strong and not have any leakage. Gary's also looking for other benefits that are off the mat, but also in grappling. But that's really the main thing for me.
Yeah, but tell us about the time when you were in the middle, you had already inserted the Kegel balls, and somebody broke into your house, and you knocked them out with, by throwing a ball at them, but not with your arms. Can you explain? Tell us a little bit about that?
It's really hard to describe over just audio. But you've seen those things like the ninjas would throw like a couple of
throwing star.
No, a couple of balls with a string in the middle that would wrap around the legs.
Yeah.
So you got to just move just right and twist your body as you release the balls. And the funny thing is, it was scary. It was scary breaking into my house. And
Gary's like,
well, I wanted to get a hold of those balls that you were telling me about. Okay. You want to let me just...
oh.
I feel like this one went south rather quickly. Like it started south.
Yeah, so definitely check out that audiobook that may never be published and probably won't be published. But Byron went down that road, and he didn't have any fear, and he tried them out, and it's worked great for him.
I'm glad Joe brought it kind of into at least a medical field.
Joe's like, what are these guys talking about?
Yeah, I had to Google it. I'm like, what the heck?
But Kegel exercises are very important.
Yeah. Do not neglect them.
Yeah. Speaking of something that we don't want to be neglectful of is giving a shout out to a couple of our Patreon supporters. Man, some of our biggest and best listeners are found on Patreon. I want to give a shout out to Dennis, Brian, and Ramus. And Ramus, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but you guys are just a handful of people that are on Patreon supporting us every week. If you want to join them, the average donation is $1 per episode. You go on there, you sign up. Hey, I want to give $1 or a couple of dollars per episode that comes out, and then at the end of the month, it will reach out and tell your credit card that hey, there were 6 episodes this month or 5, and that's a fairly simple way we were able to be listener supported. If you've noticed, we don't have a whole bunch of ads on here. We have a couple audiobooks that we've made that we are proud to sell you guys, and we think that you guys would enjoy. And then we have Patreon supporters, and that's really what keeps this podcast going strong and growing and doing bigger and better things. We've definitely done some things this year that we haven't done before, like having a big group event. We've done a couple podcasts that were video related, done a big podcast together. We've got the equipment to do all that sort of thing, and Patreon's a big part of that. And when you sign up to be a Patreon supporter, we'll send you out a 5-inch BJJBrick gi patch and a BjjBrick sticker. And if you want to join the private Facebook group, send me a message at bjjbrick@gmail.com. Say, hey, I'm a Patreon supporter. I want to be in the private group. And you'll get a little insight of what's going on behind the scenes and maybe ask an interview question or two to people that we have coming up. Still have a couple of pictures of Gary left that are autographed, so if you're interested in that, it's not too late, although it could be very soon. And a couple of lucky Patreon supporters in the future. So, just want to give thanks to all the Patreon supporters, especially highlighting Dennis, Brian, and Ramus.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We appreciate it. And it keeps the podcast going. Helps us put out a better quality product every week.
Regardless of how Gary tries to change it to be Kegel balls.
I think that's quality, guys. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. Speaking of quality, you do not want to miss episode 255 next week. We have on Mitch Hall. So it's going to be an awesome show. Do not miss it. Tell all your friends about it.
Yep. Mitch is a training partner or a black belt that trains with Rolly Delgado, and talking with Rolly so much during the event, he was thinking about Mitch. Hey, you got to talk to this guy. And man, what a great idea that was that Rolly had, and connected with Mitch and had a great time. So that'll be coming up next week. Man, these weeks go by fast, gentlemen.
Yeah, every 7 days or so, a new week rolls around.
Can't believe it.
That's fast. Yeah.
We'll catch you guys next week. Stay sweaty, my friends.
And don't forget to shower.
Train hard, train smart, get better, guys. We'll see you on the mats.
Thank you for listening. I hope you find the time today to roll. After all, the best way to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Kegel balls, Gary. Shoot.
I was like, what's Joe, Googling him, and I was like, oh, crap. All Kegel balls.